what's going on, everybody? This is Frank Chen with REIClub.com, your link to creative real estate. I want to thank you for being here with us today. I want to welcome you to our podcast. We're going to get face-to-face with real estate investors and experts all around the nation, asking them the questions that you want to know. You may recognize the face on the screen right there. Before I bring them on, if you are new today, I haven't had a chance to, and you hadn't had a chance to visit REIClub.com, I encourage you to do so. We have thousands of free articles, hundreds of videos, really cool tools and resources that you get access to absolutely free. And if you'd like to get free monthly updates from us to get, updates about our bi-weekly webinars, new YouTube videos, interviews just like this, all you got to do is sign up for our free monthly newsletter at reiclub.com/update. And of course, finally, if you're listening via YouTube or iTunes, please remember to leave us a favorable comment because it really does help us out. So with those announcements, I'm ready to get us started. We have a very lovely guest with us joining us. His name is Frank Gallinelli. He's the president of Real Data, and he's been providing investment and development analysis to investors and helping them with these types of calculations when it comes to commercial real estate. What makes Frank really special as well is that he's a best-selling author for a book called What Every Real Estate Investor Needs to Know About Cash Flow, which I'm pretty sure you guys are interested in. And he sold over 100,000 copies, which is pretty impressive. And what's also makes Frank really awesome is that he's a professor at Columbia University for the graduate school. So he really knows what he's doing. Of course, he really knows what he's teaching as well. So you guys are definitely in for a treat. So without further ado, it's my great pleasure to bring on Mr. Frank Gallinelli. How you doing, Frank?
Good, Frank. Thanks for having me on, and thanks for that glowing introduction.
Absolutely. No, I feel like everybody who spends time with us deserves that type of introduction. I really like this topic we're going to be talking about today. We have a lot of beginners here at REI Club, and they're always asking questions, is commercial right for me? Or, how do I get involved with commercial if I don't have, a lot of money? So we're going to get into those questions today and really help you guys better understand this niche of real estate, and of course, how tangible it is, not only for experienced investors, but also for you new guys out there. So let's go ahead and dive right on into it, Frank. So kind of give us a little bit of a background. Did you always start with commercial? How did you get into commercial real estate?
Well, my entry into commercial real estate was also my entry into the software business in a way, because this goes back about 40 years. I hate to admit to just how long I've been rattling around in this business. But back around 1980, I was looking to acquire my first piece of commercial real estate, and serendipitously enough, at the same moment, I had also acquired this new gadget that was called a personal computer. I mean, this thing was just only a little bit heavier than my riding lawn tractor, okay, and had used discs that looked like medium-sized pizzas. But I said, well, I've also got this thing called a spreadsheet program. Maybe I can do what I've been doing with paper and pencil and regular calculators, give it a try.
Yeah.
And so I analyzed this deal, how to acquire it, how to play with different acquisition price, different structure on the financing, and so on. And I made a whole bunch of different scenarios as to how we might acquire this property. And I showed it to a couple of colleagues of mine, and they said, "How'd you do that?" And at that moment, a software company was born. And then that was my intro into commercial real estate. And I was also a sales manager for a commercial real estate company. So kind of everything dovetailed together with that little, as I say, serendipitous event.
Well, let me ask you this. You said you got into softwares. What is your background, if you don't mind me asking?
Well, it goes back. I graduated from Yale in the 60s and went into teaching. So I've come around full circle now that I teach at Columbia. It's not quite the same thing as.
What exactly is it that you teach?
I teach real estate finance, specifically income property investment analysis.
Oh,
so
nice.
As an adjunct in their Master of Science for Real Estate Development program.
I've been
doing this for about over a decade now.
Oh, wow. And I'm just curious, is there a lot of interest? Are your classes always filled? What kind of are you dealing with millennials? Are you dealing with older people? A wide variety?
It's really kind of interesting because these are not newly minted grad students. This is a very cosmopolitan group. I mean, I can probably count the U.S. citizens on the fingers of one hand.
Interesting.
They're from all over the world.
Wow.
And a lot of them have already had background in finance. I've had investment bankers and derivatives traders and people who've worked in development, real estate development, and now they're kind of, many of them are reinventing themselves in this program for real estate developers. And I have my one little niche in that program where if they're going to be playing around with income property, I teach them how to look at the income property and how to make sense out of it.
I feel like when it comes to any type of deal, we always focus mainly on your due diligence, making sure you understand the numbers, especially when it comes to commercial property. So
Yeah.
without your class, I feel like a lot of people would be, in the dark without the right type of education. So I'm really excited to get into the questions today. But first, I know you said you were an author for what every real estate investor needs to know about cash flow. Give me a little insight to kind of why you created this book or why you wanted to author this book.
Well, that's kind of almost a funny story, actually. I've always had an interest in investor education, and I think that comes from my feeling from having dealt with literally thousands and thousands of investors over being in the software business for more than 30 years and being, prior to that in the brokerage industry, that there was sort of a pandemic of financial illiteracy that I took as my mission to see if I could overcome. But I used to write on our website, I used to write articles, still do, as a matter of fact, about various investment topics. One day the phone rings in my office, okay? It's an editor from McGraw-Hill. Now, I wasn't smart enough to realize that if somebody calls you from the 75th floor on 6th Avenue in New York and says, "Would you like to write a book?" You're supposed to drop to your knees and say, "Absolutely, absolutely." But no, I just gave the guy a hard time.
Oh, no.
And I says, "Well, maybe I could probably do something like that for you if you really want me to." And he said, "Well, we kind of have in mind something that sort of looks like a book that we had published some number of years ago. I'd like you to take a look at it and see if you could write something along these lines for us," and so on. So he sends me the book, and I take a look at it, and I call him back, and I said, I have dealt with literally tens of thousands of investors over the past X number of decades, whatever it was at that point. And he says, and in that time, I think I could identify 3 people who could understand the book you just sent me. By the way, I'm not one of them. So I says, I think I'm going to try to write a book, maybe for the guy in the next bar stool or something, but something that is accessible, something where I take the mystery out of how to analyze a piece of income-producing real estate so that a person who is intelligent but not necessarily experienced can make some sense out of this. Well, there's no accounting for taste because, as you said, the book has been extraordinarily successful. They just released the 3rd edition.
Oh, fantastic. Congratulations.
And it's been, as you say, a top seller for more than a decade.
And this could be found on Amazon, is that right?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Okay, cool. So you guys are looking for like a cash flow book that's easy to absorb. Definitely check that out. Also, let me ask you this. Do you recommend that, for instance, we get this question all the time. I'd probably say in the 6 years I've been at REIClub, hands down, probably the top question about real estate, commercial real estate is, should investors who are just starting out, should they start with residential or should they consider commercial? And is it even possible for them to start with commercial?
Well, that's an excellent question.
Yeah.
And there's really no, one size fits all kind of answer to it because the issues that you've got to deal with, the questions you've got to answer are both global, actually, both isn't the right word. They're global, they're local, and they're personal. So on a global scale, you need to see what does the general economy looking like. If it looks like we're tanking, then commercial real estate depends upon businesses being viable. And if you think that we're in a market or going into an economy where businesses are going to be struggling, then maybe you want to, think about backing off on commercial. And then, of course, there's the local aspect that no matter what may be true globally, the opposite could be true locally. And then finally, there's the personal issue. What do you feel comfortable with? And I find that a lot of beginning investors feel more comfortable with residential real estate because they're more familiar. Right. Everybody has lived somewhere, so they have some idea as to what residential units are and how they work and how landlord-tenant relationships in residential environments how they kind of work, and so there's perhaps a greater comfort level with that. Again, there's always exceptions. You may be in business yourself, and you may be a tenant. Perhaps you're running a store, you have an office, whatever, and you've already been through the landlord-tenant relationship from the point of view of the tenant. Now you have some understanding, some knowledge, some experience with that. and so you're not uncomfortable.
Mm.
And that could put you into the opportunity to get into commercial property right off the bat.
Let me ask you this, with your finance background, I'm sure you've analyzed apartment complexes to shopping, strips to malls, things, outdoor malls. Obviously, for a beginning investor, they're looking for something maybe smaller, something a little bit more tangible. You know, I always get approached by people asking me, can I get into shopping centers or should I invest in a small apartment complex? Where do you feel is a good start place to begin, and what kind of indicators do you feel they should be paying attention to when making this decision? Based on their
Well,
market, of course. Right?
yeah, yeah. It really comes to where do you get started? How do you get out of the starting gate? And I think the first thing I always suggest, and I do about a half of a lecture in my graduate course about the subject of clarity. As I say, in terms of where they should start out, before even make any of those decisions about, should I get a small residential property? Should I get a little strip shopping center? I wouldn't recommend starting off with a regional shopping mall if you're a beginner. But I give a lecture to my students on the subject of clarity. Okay? And part of that lecture is I say that as an investor, as a beginning investor, you've got to start off with understanding what is your objective, what's your motivation, why are you doing this? Okay, I always quote the line out of Lewis Carroll. It says, "If you don't know where you're going, any road will get you there." But as I also say, Yogi Bear improved that. He said, if you don't know where you're going, you'll probably wind up someplace else.
I think that one's probably more accurate.
Right.
Yeah.
And so I say, you got to know why you're doing this. You got to understand where you're going before you start on the path. Are you looking, for example, for an instant home run? Does that make you want to be a house flipper? Are you looking for ongoing cash flow to augment, to supplement your regular employment income? Are you an entrepreneurial sort of person, and maybe you want to look for a value add opportunity? Or maybe you're looking to build up long-term equity because you're thinking about your future retirement, or you're thinking about financing your kids' college education. But if you don't answer these questions first, you're going to be lost. You're not going to know what is the right thing for you to do. So that's the first step in the decision process. Then once you've decided what kind of property you think is going to fit your investment objectives, that's when you get into things like the due diligence. And even there, it's not entirely obvious how you start that, because then everybody wants to start crunching numbers and saying, okay, so how much do you pay for fuel? I said, no, 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 you don't start there. You don't start there. You start with your market due diligence. You find out what's the local economy like where you want to buy something. What are the prevailing cap rates in that area? What's the business climate? Are people starting new businesses, or people moving out? I hate to tell you, but I live in Fairfield, Connecticut. Guess what's happening here? GE, after how many decades, is moving out of town, moving out of state. All right. So you have to be looking at that part of your due diligence. And then finally, you move into the property decision itself.
So with these, is there a centralized place that you feel like, or you have any websites or places people can visit where like, here's what's happening, here's the growth, here's, here's the decline, anything along those lines?
I think I'd quote the famous stock market advice: if you've read it in the paper, it's already too late.
That's very true. That's very true.
I always urge people to stick close to home when they're starting out, because that's where you know where the cracks in the sidewalk are. You have kind of a visceral sense for what's going on when you start in a local community. So you can get information. You can talk to local brokers and find out what cap rates are like. You can talk to local appraisers. If that building across the street has been having a hard time finding tenants because you're looking at it, you're there. Okay, so while there are sources of information, you can go to Realty Rates to get cap rate information, for example. You can go to LoopNet to get information about properties that are available and what's happening in the leasing or selling market. But I think you also want to just use your own two eyes, your two ears, and put your ear to the ground, literally, and learn what's happening locally.
Would you consider this is like what we were just mentioning, part of the due diligence process?
As it's the first step in the due diligence process, really. And you need to do that before you start really picking apart a particular piece of property.
So
Because,
ideally, okay, go ahead. Go. I'm sorry.
yeah, because no property lives in a vacuum. Okay, so if you're going to understand how that property may work, you need to understand the environment in which it lives. Sorry, go ahead.
No, no, yeah. So we covered the environment. So what I'm thinking is right now, if you're coming into this business, that's number one. Understand the market, start in your own neighborhood. Don't bring yourself out of your own comfort zone. I think that's a big factor there. Number two is let's talk about calculations, right?
Okay.
Numbers to be looking for, cap rates, NOI. Can you briefly kind of just explain why those numbers are important and kind of how to what's the word I'm looking for? Break those numbers down to something that's you can understand.
Yeah, absolutely. And this kind of gets to the heart of what I try to teach when I
Yeah.
teach. And that is that you have to understand when you're investing in income producing property that what you're buying is an income stream. I only half jokingly tell my students, I ask them, how many people here own a home? A few people raise their hands invariably. And I say, well, I'm sorry to tell you, you're at a disadvantage here because everything you think you know about real estate, it's going to be wrong. It's going to be counterintuitive to understanding income producing property because with homes, rising tide lifts all boats in terms of property values, what creates value in a home. With an income property, it is the income stream. And so the first thing you need to wrap your head around is the fact that what you have to analyze, what you have to project, what you have to understand is how is that income stream working? And not just at the present moment, but also how you think it might work out going forward. So in terms of doing that kind of numerical analysis, that metric mining, if you will, I told them you got to start off with what we call in the industry an APOD form, annual property operating data, which is the real estate equivalent of a profit and loss statement, but it looks a little bit different from a standard business profit and loss statement. And once you've got that, then you can work forward into a pro forma. Now, just at that very first step is where I see one of the common errors that beginning investors make.
Mm.
Because you're going to start off with what is the current picture in terms of income and expenses. And those beginning investors, from my experience, very often look at the expenses and they check them out and they say, yeah, that's right. The property taxes are right.
Yeah.
Yeah, the
Numbers
insurance
look
is
good.
right. Okay.
Yeah.
The numbers look okay.
Yeah.
So now I've got my quote net operating income. What they fail to do is to look behind the numbers that they've been presented and say, okay, everything you told me was right, but what did you forget to tell me?
That's the $1 million question. I feel
Okay,
we should be asking.
this is the Northeast.
Yeah.
You mean this apartment building that has parking spaces in the back, you've never paid any money to get rid of the snow?
Wow.
Okay, you mean you own this thing as an LLC, but you do your own tax return? You don't pay an accountant to figure out you know, to file your taxes for you? You don't hire a bookkeeper, and perhaps the most interesting one is property management. Okay. No
Oh, yeah,
number in
huge.
here, no number in here for the cost of managing the property. I said, well, listen, let's say you decided you were going to go buy shares of IBM instead of buying this property. Do you think IBM is going to expect you to show up one night a month and clean the bathrooms or shovel the sidewalk? No. If you're going to make an honest and accurate assessment of what it really costs you to own this property. Almost making a joke is that you've heard of the time value of money, huh? Well, let's flip that around. Let's talk about the money value of time, the monetary value of your time to actually manage this property, because that has value, that has worth. And if that's something that you have to contribute, then you need to factor that in when you look at the net operating income of this property.
I'm glad you really touched upon those points that everyone here, if I see you guys at the top of the hierarchy, and most investors, if you own the property, that's you, and you really have to position yourself without, exhausting your efforts because, you can quickly get burned out in this business. And, like Frank said, what is your time worth? I know mine's worth substantially more than managing a property. I do it now. I'm sorry. I hate it. I hate it. Landlording is I interviewed someone earlier. There was like, do you want to manage a property or do you want to manage your managers? So I'm glad you talked about, those components that need to be in place. Your property managers, making sure you're not the one that's doing everything. So let me ask you this, cap rates, NOI, you have LoopNet that gives you all these numbers. What advice would you give investors who are looking at these websites? What else should they be looking for other than that flashy number they're trying to attract you to?
Well, I'm not sure you're going to get enough information from any of these websites. You've really got to do that due diligence, and you've got to then start assembling the information and not just do a current year analysis, which is in most cases what you're going to get. Because again, as I've tried to instruct people who are investing, you're not buying an investment for a point in time, and so most of the information that you're digging up here is information about how it functions at a point in time, and that may be fine for looking at it right now. And if you were an appraiser, that's all you would be looking at because that's your job to estimate value at a point in time. But you are going to invest for something longer than a point in time, unless you're a house flipper. So if that's the case, then you have to start thinking about what's behind the numbers. I try to, I think my students one of these days are going to have me committed because I tell them, I says, my class is going to be the closest thing to a class in poetry that you're ever going to get in a finance curriculum. And they look at me and they say, "What are you talking about?" I says, "Well, if I were teaching you Shakespearean sonnets instead of teaching you how to do a pro forma financial analysis, what I would be teaching you is how to first read what's on the surface, the words. In this case, it's going to be the numbers.
Yeah.
And then I'd say, then look behind the words to see what is the meaning, what is the story behind the story, what's the meaning behind the numbers. So, for example, if you're looking at a particular, like a strip shopping center, you might be able to see, because the owner has given you the information about the lease terms and so on and so forth, but you've got to look and say, okay, that all works just fine for today, for this year. But let me look at the viability of these businesses, okay?
Right.
Because no matter what the leases say, what do I think is really going to happen with these people? I use an example in one of my books and one of my case studies of a strip center that has a restaurant that is famous for two things: small portions and surly waitstaff. Okay, and so
it's a good place to eat, or I don't know. I'm hoping
right.
so.
So that explains why I don't see anybody sitting there. All right. So I'm looking at this center, and they've got a place, and this restaurant has a lease and so on. But do I really think they're going to renew that lease the year after next? No, they probably aren't. So if they aren't, I need to be making a projection of not just the current cash flow, but a projection of the future income stream as well.
So let me ask you this question. You say projection. Sometimes in real estate, we talk in residential, they're like, hey, it's probably not, best to predict in 5-10 years. Oh, they're, a new companies are moving in. It's at market value now, but I know it's going to appreciate in 10 years. But we can never anticipate a bubble of any sorts, things like that. So when you say projections, what are you looking for? Are you looking at 2 years from now? 6 months? What do you mean by projections?
I tell income property investors that they really should be making projections that go out 5, 7, 10 years.
Okay.
And then, of course, they say to me, "That's ridiculous. Okay, nobody can predict the future."
Right.
I have kind of a multi-layered response to that objection. Number one is, if you're going to base your decision strictly on how the property operates today, then you are in effect doing exactly the same thing. You're predicting the future. You're saying the future is going to look pretty much like it is today, with some incremental changes. So you're not taking into account the fact that this restaurant's going to go belly up, or that that this strip center has 2 nail salons, and obviously one of them is going to go broke. How many nail salons can you have 2 out of 5 stores? this kind of thing. So you're basing everything on just that 1 year. The second part of my suggestion about projecting out into the future is that you should not try to make some kind of single, I nailed it, I'm a 10.0 because I nailed my dismount on this projection. But rather you should do a best case, a worst case, and a somewhere in between, a most likely, and do these three projections at the very least. And say, okay, now, can I see myself living with somewhere in between the extremes? All right.
Right.
Things are never, again, to quote an old cliche, things are never going to end up as good as you hope or as bad as you fear. So in all likelihood, the reality is going to end up somewhere in between. Would I consider this an investment that I didn't regret if it ended up somewhere in between? The mistake is trying to say, I'm going to nail this down to the fourth decimal point in terms of, what my property taxes are going to be 10 years from now. You're not going to do that.
It drives me crazy.
But you can make reasonable assumptions that it's going to be, somewhere based on prior history, it's going to be somewhere in this range. So you work with a range, not trying to nail it.
Okay. So predictions, guys, with commercials, don't just, I personally don't have an experience in commercials, so this is relatively new for me as well. And I just like to know, like, when it comes to cap rates, NOIs, calculations, I always feel like you have to get as close as the number as possible, because within the first year, if you're like, say, buying a commercial property, an income producing property, there's quite a bit of work that needs to be done on your end in order to maximize or increase those revenues, correct?
Absolutely, yep.
Right. So yeah. So I'm just wondering, predictions and things like that, it can still be done for commercials, what you're saying.
Yeah, and need to keep in mind that I'm not saying that you don't pay careful attention to, in fact, how that 1 year, that first year performance plays out. For example, what a typical appraiser will do is to take that first year net operating income, apply the prevailing market capitalization rate, and say, this is my estimated value of the property. Now, that's not irrelevant. I'm just saying it's not sufficient. It's relevant because, for one thing, that gives you kind of a benchmark to say, okay, if what I'm looking at to purchase this, the price at which I'm looking to purchase this property, if it's way off from this, there's a story that I need to investigate. Also, what do you think the lender is going to look at when that lender decides if this thing should be financed? He's going to look at that capitalization of net operating income at the current time.
Right.
But I think you need to, as an investor, you need to understand that, the current time will pass and you're going to still be owning this property. So what do you think is going to happen after the current time? And is what you think will happen after the current time going to meet your investment objectives and give you the kind of return that you think you really need?
And just so you guys know, I talked to Frank earlier about this, and as for giving definitions like cap rates, NOIs, we do have at REIClub, we do cover other videos, purely definition based, so you guys kind of just have an understanding of what those terms are. They're always being thrown around in commercial real estate. But if you need that kind of information, just search for those like NOI or cap rate and just REIClub, and you can find those videos. Now, what I'm really curious about too, Frank, is you deal with students, you deal with older people, people all around the country, all around the nation, all around the world. What's probably the most common mistake that you're seeing investors make when they're initially approaching a deal, or when they're first initially analyzing a commercial property?
We could probably make a whole other podcast based on that question.
What would you say would be the top? I love the top three. What do you think?
Okay,
top three.
Top three. Yeah, I might have to stretch it out to four.
Okay, I'll take four.
Okay, we'll take four. Okay, good enough. I think probably the very first one is falling in love with the property. Okay, I want to buy this property because I like this property. It's a beautiful property. It's in a fantastic location. All right. Now, don't misunderstand. These are not irrelevant issues. If the property is in a good location, I mean, the drill location. People would have me locked away if I said location was irrelevant. But with income producing property, the location or the physical appeal or the physical condition are meaningful one step removed. You've got to connect the dots. They are meaningful to the extent that they impact the income stream, that they impact the cash flow from the property. An example I give in my class is two identical buildings side by side. One of them has normal sort of commercial leases where there are they're staggered in terms of their expirations and they have built-in escalations and maybe options to renew, yada yada. The other one, who knows what this guy was thinking 5 years ago when he locked in long-term leases at what was then a fair rent, but is now no longer a fair rent and is going to go on 5, 10 more years. Okay, two identical buildings, two entirely different income streams. They do not have the same value. If those were two four-bedroom colonials next to each other, they would have the same value. So you have to understand that you don't fall in love with the property. You look at the income stream and you base your decision on the numbers. I think the second one, the second big mistake that I see so often goes right back to what you were just saying in terms of terminology. What does cap rate mean? What does NOI mean? What is a discount? What is a discounted cash flow analysis and so on? So often, I see beginning investors misuse the terminology. In fact, I see them make up terminology that does not even exist in nature.
I would
They
love to
talk
hear one.
about.
Do you have one off the top of your head?
I think I had someone to come up with net operating expense or whatever instead of net operating income one time. I'll see this all the time, and there's a couple of reasons why that's really, really bad. One is that it leads you down the wrong path. It leads you to wrong conclusions. If you don't understand what net operating income really is, then when you try to capitalize NOI, you're going to come up with the wrong answer. If you throw in, as I've seen people do, if you throw in mortgage interest or depreciation or whatever that doesn't belong there, or capital improvements doesn't belong there, then you go capitalizing it, try to come up with a value, you're going to come up with the wrong value. Perhaps even more important, when you start throwing terminology around incorrectly, you use words that phrases, terms that don't exist, or you use them in situations where they don't apply, you might as well be wearing a sandwich board that says, I am a beginner. I really don't know what I'm talking about. Wouldn't you like to pick my pocket? Now and cheat me because I'm obviously a beginner and I shouldn't be doing this. So doing the terminology, getting the terminology wrong, not doing your homework, not getting an education before you start running out there. I mean, you wouldn't do brain surgery without education, so why would you do this? I think I'll give you just one more. I'll stick to three, okay? and that is looking for what is the latest hot market to invest in. Okay, I can remember once I was giving a couple of talks out in California, and I must have not given very good talks because when I got to the Q&A, nobody wanted to ask me questions about the subjects that I was talking about. They wanted to know, what were the best neighborhoods in Las Vegas to buy houses?
Yeah.
Yeah, this was during this I think was three bubbles ago.
Okay.
Okay, so this goes back a ways, but I never forgot this. I mean, that's how commercial investors reckon time in terms of bubbles. So this was about three bubbles ago. I didn't know anything about Las Vegas. These people didn't know anything about Las Vegas. Blind leading the blind. No intention of answering that question, obviously. But
Yeah.
it's a very common thing where a beginning investor will listen to advice that, oh, this is the place to buy. It's like the hot stock tip kind of thing, and it's a path to ruin. So
I'm so glad you touched up on that point. I get always approached by like newbie investors who are always like, rather than trying to know the important like terminology, getting familiar with the important areas like markets, how is your market doing? What are some indicators? All these important questions they should actually be asking. They only care about how much money can I make from it? How quick can I go? Do I need cash to do it? It's like, these are all great questions, but if you don't really know how all these numbers work, you're just a blank check. And then you're the type of person investors want to work with, regardless if it's a good deal or not. So, really I think what we really want to the point that we really want to beat home here is, if you want to get involved in commercial, first know the terminology, get familiar with your own market. Don't get super, super excited just because the numbers that you see on LoopNet or someone who's presenting it to you look good. Do your own due diligence. Talk to the right people. Frank, do you work directly with like brokers, or have you assisted investors with dealing with like commercial brokers? or is it more about once they hand you the numbers, you assist? Like how does that work?
Well, basically, what we try to do is our software is designed to help investors to, analyze the property and deal with the other party in the transaction. So, for example, a person who's looking at a property will run the numbers on that property using our software. We don't usually get involved directly in the transaction, but they will use the presentation then to go back to the seller and say, this is a reasonable price, not the price you're asking, and here's why the price you're asking doesn't make any sense. I would have a better return on lottery tickets if I bought at your price. So sellers also then will do this. Will do the same thing. They will justify their asking price by doing a pro forma that says, here's why you will have a decent return with this, and they will use these for presentations to lenders to say, I've had more than a few people say, I walked into my lender and I had all the questions answered. They couldn't throw me out.
Yeah.
I had all the questions answered, and that just reminds me of one of the important metrics that I find that investors very often overlook, but it's hard to overlook if they use our programs because it's right there in the middle. Debt coverage ratio.
Okay, right.
If you don't know what debt coverage ratio is, you shouldn't be investing. And if you don't know that your debt coverage ratio is satisfactory, you shouldn't be walking into the lender and making yourself look foolish because they're just going to throw you out. So you need to run these numbers and know that, in fact, part of your due diligence is finding out what required debt coverage ratio is with the lenders that you're talking to, and to make sure that the deal you're trying to assemble is going to meet that debt coverage requirement.
So what I'm hearing is, based on what you're teaching, you're really helping people prepare the information they need before they even talk to the lender.
Absolutely, yeah. You don't want to go to the lender and have it be a learning experience. Okay.
Oh man, I bet everybody who just heard that line, who has walked into a bank, who is like, oh, you just talk to your bank and they'll help you out. But when it comes to commercial, if you're like, oh yeah, I'm interested and I need this much money, and they're asking you all these questions you don't know the answers to,
you got to have your ducks in a row. Your ducks have to march in line into the bank right in front of you, so that you have all your ducks in a row. You know that you're satisfying their loan to value requirements. You know that you're satisfying their debt coverage requirements, and you've got to be able to prove it, not just say it.
So right, so if you've ever asked me personally, or you've ever asked another person, like, oh, I'm interested in commercial, I'm kind of scared, or like that. Ask yourself this question: do you know what NOIs are? Do you know what cap? Do you know the terminology? If you have no, that's why you're scared. So it's just the not being familiar with the topic, not understanding how all the places go, like where all the places are, people and places need to go. So that's I think what Frank was trying to say is education's super important here, guys. I know some of you are on the fence, like, I don't really want to do it. It's just too much work. I'll stick with residential. Guess what? If you don't know anything about residential, it's the same type of education. So really keep your mind open to that. Now, one question I want to follow up with you, Frank, is, a lot of our investors, in addition to, not knowing where to begin, especially with commercial, they're thinking, oh man, I need to pick up a partner. I need to do this with somebody else who maybe has more experience than me. What's your take on that? Is it something, is commercial something that should be taken on by an individual or by like a partnership?
Well, that's an excellent question. By the way, just a segue on the term commercial. Commercial can also include apartment buildings.
Yeah.
In the vernacular, commercial means business occupied type of properties, but pretty much anything that's more than 6 units is an apartment building. A building whose role in life is to produce income. We can think of that as commercial. So pretty much everything we've talked about here can apply to apartment buildings of some size, as well as properties that own that are occupied by businesses. Now, in terms of partnerships, that's an excellent question because, for one thing, if you go back to the Great Recession, when there was no financing available for anything, what we found was that virtually every deal that we talked to our customers about, they were involved in doing partnerships because there was very little debt available. So they were doing equity instead.
Interesting.
Okay, they couldn't get much finance. They could get no financing or 50%, 40% of the amount that they needed in financing. That's one of the reasons we really kind of enhanced the partnership analysis portion of our software, so people could work these things through and make a presentation to equity investors, because that was important. So that can be an essential part of making a successful deal. A lot of people say, geez, investing in real estate, that's all about, being a rugged individualist and doing everything myself. I say, well, sometimes if you leverage these things too high, you're not going to really be making any money. Whereas if you have equity partners and you don't have to finance as much, I mean, would you rather have 50% of a positive cash flow or 100% of a negative cash flow?
I like
Okay?
how we position it like that.
Yeah, really. Okay.
Yeah.
And then the point that you raised, of course, especially if you're a new investor, if you can bring in partners who have some experience, this is an education as well as a transaction. So you can learn from partners who have some experience doing these deals, as well as being able to assemble more successful deals. So I think partnerships are something that investors, all investors, beginners and experienced, always have to have as one of the options, one of the arrows in their quiver.
And I feel like we covered so many great points today, Frank, about from kind of the mindset. I think we approach this from a mindset perspective for investors. If you've ever been on the fence or you've always considered commercial real estate, I think we covered a lot of points. Finance, where you need to be in your education. Should you be doing this alone? What indicators should you be paying attention to when looking at commercial property? I know we didn't really get into like the real nuts and bolts of the numbers, how to calculate what cap rates is considered a good cap rate, or what's NOI, or how to adjust these numbers. I think we could definitely do a follow-up with you, Frank, on those topics in regards to manipulating these numbers so you could turn a negative cash flowing property, or maybe a property that's just slightly positive, and how to slowly increase those numbers over the years. I think that's part of your projections as well, right? That you need to present to a bank. Here's it is now, but here's what I can do with it in year 2, year 5, year 7.
Yeah.
So I would love to have a video like that on it. Today, I really want to just focus mainly on where you need to be mentally, so you're not just throwing commercial to the side, thinking it's out of my reach. So get started, guys. Get started in your education. Frank, I'm sure you have some more, education or, some access to, I think, real data, things like that. Where can people, get a hold of you? How do people get a hold of you? Where can people go to get more information about you?
Any of your listeners are certainly welcome to contact me. They can go to my website, realdata.com, and pull down the little support thing and send me an email. So that's fine there. You can find me on LinkedIn under my name, on Facebook at Real Data. And if you want to see more about the educational materials that we provide, you can go to learn.realdata.com and see some of the topics that we cover there.
Wonderful. So that's what we're going to do today, guys. We're going to close down the call today. I want to thank Frank so much for his time. Frank, you were really great. It was a really pleasure for me to have a chance to interview you. We're going to, if you'd like to get an update for when this video is going to be released, again, sign up for our monthly newsletter at REIClub.com/update. We'll let you know anytime a video like this is posted. Again, leave us a favorable comment on iTunes, YouTube, and of course, if there's any specific questions you maybe want us to follow up on when it comes with when it pertains to Frank and I, leave it on our YouTube channel comment section. Let us know, like, hey, Frank, I'm curious, could you cover something like this, or both Franks on anything, and I'll get with Frank and we'll discuss how to put this together for you, because our goal really this year is to kind of just really take the questions you have that you're not getting answered anywhere else and getting you face to face with the guys who know the answers. So let's, give Frank a round of applause. Thank you so much, Frank. We appreciate you. Is there anything you would like to conclude our call with, or say anything of words of wisdom?
I have no words of wisdom, but I would like to thank you for giving me the opportunity to chat with you this morning. It was a real hoot. I hope we can do it again sometime.
Absolutely. Thanks again, guys. Take care. We look forward to talking to you next time. Good investing, and bye-bye.